The emergency klaxons shrieked through the passenger deck of the interstellar vessel Horizon Seeker as Theo Parker clutched his safety harness with white knuckles. At 10 years old, he understood enough about space travel to know that the violent shuddering of the ship's hull wasn't normal. All passengers proceed to evacuation pods. The automated system announced in its unnervingly calm voice. Critical system failure imminent. Planetary impact in 7 minutes. Through the viewport, Theo could see the swirling azure and emerald atmosphere of an unscheduled planet growing larger by the second. His parents were 3 decks below in the engineering section. They had promised to meet him at the evacuation point, but the last communication had cut off mid-sentence. Captain Renfield burst onto the deck, his uniform singed and face streaked with hydraulic fluid. "Everyone move. Pods 3 through 7 are operational." He grabbed Theo's arm, pulling him from his seat. "Where are your parents, boy?" "Engineering deck," Theo managed through a dry throat. "They said they'd meet me." The captain's expression darkened. Engineering took a direct hit. "We need to move now." Theo's world collapsed around him faster than the failing ship. "But 5 minutes to impact," the ship's computer interjected. The captain dragged Theo toward the evacuation corridor, but when they reached the branching hallway, a massive structural beam crashed down, separating them. Through the settling dust and sparks, Theo could see the captain on the other side, unreachable. "Pod 8. Renfield shouted, pointing down the right corridor. "It's still operational. Get to Pod 8 and launch immediately." Theo ran, his small frame navigating the tilting corridors as the artificial gravity fluctuated. He reached Pod 8, finding it empty. Everyone else had already evacuated. With shaking hands, he strapped himself in and initiated the launch sequence his parents had drilled into him countless times. Emergency evacuation initiated, the pod's computer confirmed. "Warning, pod capacity suboptimal for single occupant under standard height and weight parameters." The pod ejected with a violent jolt, spinning away from the doomed vessel. Through the small viewport, Theo watched in horror as the Horizon Seeker plummeted toward the planet's surface, breaking apart in atmospheric entry. The pod's descent was hardly smoother. The small craft bucked and rattled, its heat shields glowing cherry red as Theo fought unconsciousness. His last thought before blackness took him was that he should have died with his parents. From her vantage point atop the crumbling spire of what had once been the Grand Observatory of Zendaria, Celera watched the fiery descent of the alien craft with detached interest. Her silver eyes, with their distinctive vertical pupils, narrowed against the daylight as debris scattered across the northern plains. It had been 73 cycles since she had last seen a vessel enter Zendaria's atmosphere, and longer still since she had encountered another sentient being. As the last known survivor of the once mighty Zendarian Empire, solitude had become her only constant companion. Celera adjusted her worn atmospheric filter, the device essential for her species' sensitive respiratory system in Zendaria's evolving atmosphere. The planet, like her civilization, was slowly dying. She descended the spire with practiced agility, her lithe, blue-scaled form moving with fluid grace despite her advanced age of 3 centuries. Her ceremonial markings, once vibrant indicators of her status as a high scholar, had faded to pale indigo traces along her arms and neck. Curiosity, a luxury she rarely indulged, compelled her to investigate. The crash site lay 2 days' journey across the Whispering Plains. Whatever, or whoever, had survived would likely perish without intervention. The planet's indigenous predators would see to that. Let them, she thought bitterly. Through her scanner, she detected the unmistakable energy signature of human technology. Humans. The very species that had risen against the Zendarian Empire, triggering the war that had reduced her mighty civilization to ruins and ashes. Logical analysis suggested she should ignore the crash. Resources were scarce, compassion, scarcer still. Yet something, perhaps the scholar in her that centuries of isolation had failed to extinguish, urged her forward. Theo awoke to the scent of alien soil and the metallic taste of blood in his mouth. The evacuation pod had embedded itself in soft, moss-like vegetation, its hatch partially open from impact. Emergency lights blinked weakly, indicating life support was failing. Pain lanced through his left arm as he unstrapped himself. Probably broken. His survival training, mandatory for all children on interstellar journeys, clicked into place despite his terror. First priority, assess the situation. The pod's communication array was shattered. The emergency beacon, designed to last weeks, showed damage to its power cell, days at most before it failed completely. The survival kit contained a water purifier, nutrient bars, a basic medical scanner, and a multi-tool. Second priority, secure the area. Theo crawled from the wreckage, wincing as his injured arm protested. The landscape that greeted him was both beautiful and terrifying. Towering purple-leafed vegetation swayed in an alien breeze beneath twin-setting suns. Strange calls echoed from distant forests. Reality crashed down upon him with crushing finality. He was alone on an unknown planet. His parents were gone. No one would look for a single child presumed dead in a catastrophic ship failure. As darkness approached, Theo used the pod's emergency shelter extension, creating a small haven against whatever horrors the alien night might bring. He splinted his arm using the medical kit and choked down half a nutrient bar, rationing supplies that might need to last indefinitely. In the eerie light of unfamiliar constellations, Theo finally allowed himself to cry, but only briefly. Tears wouldn't keep him alive. As he drifted into an exhausted sleep, he made a promise to himself. He would survive. He would find a way off this planet. And somehow, he would make his parents proud. Unknown to him, in the darkness beyond the pod's feeble security perimeter, Silver Eyes watched with reluctant fascination. The last Zendarian scholar studied the sleeping human child, wondering how long such a fragile creature could possibly last on this unforgiving world. The piercing shriek of a skyreaver woke Theo from his fitful sleep. Dawn's purple light filtered through the pod's shelter as he scrambled to his feet, heart hammering against his ribs. The creature, a massive winged predator with 6 limbs and a serrated beak, circled above, its attention fixed on the crash site. 3 days had passed since the crash. Theo had established a meager routine: conserve supplies, explore the immediate vicinity, and signal for help using the failing emergency beacon. His broken arm had begun to heal thanks to the medical kit's bone stabilizer, but hunger gnawed at him constantly. The nutrient bars would last another week at most. The skyreaver dived, its talons extended toward the shelter. Theo grabbed the multi-tool and braced himself against the pod's interior. The creature's weight crashed against the shelter's membrane, its beak stabbing through the material mere inches from his face. "Get down." The command, spoken in heavily accented Galactic Standard, came from outside. A brilliant flash of energy cut through the morning air, and the skyreaver screeched in pain. It retreated skyward, one wing smoking from a precise hit. Theo peered through the torn shelter to see a tall, blue-scaled figure wielding what appeared to be an ancient energy weapon. The alien Silver Eyes met his briefly before turning back to track the retreating predator. "It will return with others," the alien said, slinging the weapon over her shoulder. "This territory belongs to their nesting colony." Theo crawled from the damaged shelter, struggling to process the alien's appearance. Blue scales covered her humanoid form, with faded markings visible along her arms. She wore a patchwork of what once might have been ceremonial garments and practical survival gear. "You're Zendarian," Theo said, recalling lessons from his history education. "But your people disappeared centuries ago." The alien woman's vertical pupils narrowed. "Not disappeared. Exterminated. By your kind." She turned away. "Gather what you need quickly. More predators will come. Wait. Theo called, scrambling to collect his survival kit. Who are you? Why did you help me? The alien paused, her tall frame silhouetted against the rising suns. I am Celera, last scholar of the Zendarian High Council. And I have not yet decided if helping you was wise. Celera set a punishing pace through the alien wilderness. Theo struggled to keep up, his smaller legs working double time against the dense undergrowth. They traveled in silence for hours, climbing steadily into foothills covered with vegetation that seemed to react to their passing, shrinking away or reaching out with curious tendrils. Are we going to your home? Theo finally asked, and they stopped at a stream to refill his water purifier. Temporary shelter, Celera corrected. I have many throughout the territories. Remaining in one place attracts attention. From what? More predators? From memories. She studied him with unreadable silver eyes. What is your designation, human child? Theo. Theo Parker. He hesitated, then added, I'm 10 cycles old. My parents were engineers on the Horizon Seeker. They didn't make it. Something flickered across Celera's alien features, recognition, perhaps, or the barest hint of sympathy. The ship that created the fireball 3 days ago. I observed its descent. Can you help me contact other ships? There must be rescue patrols looking for survivors. Celera made a sound that might have been laughter, but held no humor. This system is unmarked on your star charts. It exists in a fold of space your navigation systems cannot properly map. It was how we protected our homeworld during the war. She regarded him coldly. No one will find you here, Theo Parker. By nightfall, they reached a cliffside dwelling, a structure partially carved into the rock face and partially constructed from the remnants of an ancient building. Inside, Theo marveled at the strange harmony of natural formation and sophisticated engineering. Crystal formations provided soft illumination, responding to Celera's touch by brightening or dimming. You may rest here, she said, indicating a recessed area with what appeared to be bedding. Tomorrow, you will leave. Leave? Panic edged into Theo's voice. Leave to where? I don't know this planet. I can't survive alone. That is not my concern. I preserved your life from immediate danger, as any sentient might. My obligation ends there. Please, Theo said, desperation breaking through his attempt at bravery. I can help you. I know things. Engineering things, from my parents. Celera's expression remained impassive, but she tilted her head slightly. Human engineering holds no interest for me. Your species' technology is rudimentary compared to what my civilization achieved. Then why is your weapon held together with spare parts? Theo gestured to the energy weapon she had placed carefully on a crystalline table. The power modulator is cracked. I can fix that. The Zendarian's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. You recognize Zendarian technology? My mom specialized in cross-species technological adaptation. She studied artifacts from dozens of civilizations. Theo swallowed hard against the lump forming in his throat. Including Zendarian relics. Celera approached slowly, towering over the human boy. If you lie to gain sanctuary. I'm not lying, Theo insisted. Look, the focusing crystal is misaligned, too. That's why it took 2 shots to drive away the Sky Reaver. It should only take 1. For several long moments, Celera studied him, her ancient eyes searching for deceit. Finally, she retrieved the weapon and placed it before him. Demonstrate your knowledge, Theo Parker. With careful movements, Theo used his multi-tool to open the weapon's access panel. Inside was a complex array of crystals and circuitry unlike anything manufactured by humans, yet he recognized the fundamental principles. His small fingers worked deftly, adjusting components with precision that belied his age. The crystal matrix needs to be rotated 7 degrees clockwise, he explained, making the adjustment. And this power conduit should connect to the secondary node, not the primary. When he finished, the weapon hummed with renewed energy, its indicators glowing a steady blue rather than the flickering purple of before. Celera took it, examining his work with expert eyes. Acceptable, she finally declared, though Theo could detect a note of surprise in her voice. Perhaps there is use for you after all. That night, as Theo lay on the alien bedding that conformed comfortingly to his human physiology, he watched Celera at her workstation. The Zendarian moved with deliberate grace, sorting through what appeared to be salvaged technology from various sources. Celera, he ventured quietly. How long have you been alone here? She paused, her back still to him. 173 of your years. That's a really long time. For a human, perhaps. She turned slightly, her profile sharp in the crystal light. For a Zendarian in her prime, it would be but a moment. I, however, am in my twilight. Are there others? Other Zendarians somewhere in the galaxy? Celera's shoulders stiffened. If any survived, they scattered to the furthest reaches. Contact would risk exposing them. To humans? Theo asked. To extinction. She faced him fully now. Sleep, human child. Tomorrow, if your repairs function as promised, I will reconsider your departure. As Theo drifted toward sleep, he realized that beneath her cold exterior, Celera was experiencing something she had perhaps forgotten, the simple act of conversation with another sentient being. And despite everything, he felt oddly safe in the presence of this last survivor of a civilization his own had helped destroy. Outside, twin moons rose over Zendaria, casting silver light across a landscape neither human nor Zendarian had ever expected to share. In the darkness, the planet kept its ancient secrets, waiting for dawn and the unlikely alliance forming within the cliffside dwelling. Dawn painted the crystalline spires of the ancient Zendarian city in hues of amber and violet. 2 weeks had passed since Theo's arrival, and Celera had reluctantly allowed him to remain after he demonstrated further technical aptitude by repairing several of her damaged devices. This was once our capital, Celera explained as they traversed the crumbling ruins. Zandora Prime stood for 10,000 years before the war. Theo gazed up at structures that defied human architectural understanding, buildings that seemed to flow like liquid yet remained perfectly solid, their surfaces inscribed with mathematical equations rather than decorative patterns. What happened? He asked, stepping carefully over a fallen column. Hubris, Celera replied softly. We believed ourselves the natural rulers of all sentient life. When humanity expanded beyond its expected boundaries, we sought to contain your species. Her silver eyes darkened. We underestimated your adaptability. They entered what once had been a massive dome structure. At its center stood a device Theo immediately recognized as a communication array, similar in principle to those used on interstellar vessels but far more advanced. Is this what we're here for? He asked, running his hand along the dusty console. Celera nodded. The long-reach communicator. It once connected all Zendarian worlds instantaneously, regardless of distance. She hesitated. If activated, it could potentially reach any ship passing through nearby systems. Theo's heart leaped. You mean we could call for help? Potentially. But it requires components I no longer possess. She pointed to several empty slots in the ancient device. The power matrix degraded centuries ago. Theo studied the machine, his mind racing. These connection points look similar to the quantum batteries from my evacuation pod, he said. If we could retrieve them. The crash site is a 3-day journey through Predator territory, Celera interrupted. And those batteries would provide only temporary power. Temporary is better than never, Theo countered, a spark of hope igniting within him. Celera gazed at him with an unreadable expression. Finally, she said, "Tomorrow, we will attempt the journey." As they made their way back to the shelter, Theo ventured the question that had been troubling him. "If this works, and we contact a passing ship, what happens to you?" Celera walked several paces before answering. "I remain, as I have for centuries." "You could come with me," Theo suggested. "The war ended generations ago. For you, perhaps." Celera's voice held centuries of bitterness. "But not for the last Zendarian." That night, as Theo slept, Celera retrieved an ancient memory crystal from a hidden compartment in her dwelling. The holographic image it projected showed thousands of Zendarians in ceremonial attire, celebrating what would be their final victory festival before the human rebellion. Among them was a younger Celera, standing proudly beside her mate and offspring. All lost in humanity's devastating counterattack. She had survived only by chance, away on a research expedition to Zendaria's polar region when the orbital bombardment began. She deactivated the crystal as Theo stirred in his sleep. The human child murmured something about his parents, his small face contorted with grief even in slumber. "We are not so different," Celera whispered, surprising herself with the admission. The journey back to the crash site was arduous. They narrowly avoided a pack of ground predators on the second day, and Celera's energy weapon proved invaluable when a Skyreaver spotted them in an open field. "We're close," Theo said as they crested a hill overlooking the crash zone. The evacuation pod remained partially embedded in the soil, its systems dark. As they salvaged the necessary components, Celera suddenly froze. "Down," she hissed, pushing Theo to the ground. A patrol craft of unknown design swept overhead, its sensors scanning the area. "Scavengers," Celera explained once the craft passed. "They detect crashes and harvest technology from the wreckage. We must hurry." With the quantum batteries secured, they began the return journey at a faster pace, aware that the scavengers would eventually track them. Theo noticed that Celera now positioned herself protectively between him and potential dangers, a subtle but significant change from their first journey together. "Why did your people never return to reclaim Zendaria?" Theo asked during a brief rest. Celera's gaze turned toward the distant mountains. "Because Zendaria holds the key to Zendarian power, a secret we died to protect from your kind." She studied Theo's face before adding, "A secret I now question whether should remain buried." As twin moons rose over the alien landscape, the unlikely pair continued their journey, each step bringing them closer to a confrontation with both the scavengers and their own intertwined histories. "They're gaining on us," Theo panted as he and Celera raced through the dense foliage toward the ruins of Zandora Prime. The distant whine of scavenger vehicles had grown steadily louder over the past hour. Celera's expression remained stoic, but her pace quickened. "The ruins provide cover and defensive positions," she said. "We need only reach the central complex." The quantum batteries from Theo's evacuation pod weighed heavily in his pack, their power indicators glowing steadily. 3 days of hard travel had brought them within sight of the ancient Zendarian capital, its crystalline spires catching the late afternoon sunlight. A sudden blast of energy scorched the ground mere feet away, sending them diving for cover behind a massive fallen column. "Seems they're done tracking and ready for collecting," Celera muttered, unslinging her energy weapon. She peered carefully around the edge of their shelter. 3 vessels, at least 12 scavengers. Carthasian by their markings. "Are they dangerous?" Theo asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "They trade in salvage and occasionally sentient specimens." Celera's silver eyes narrowed. "A human child and a living Zendarian would fetch considerable value in certain markets." Another energy blast struck their position, chipping away fragments of the ancient stone. Celera returned fire, her repaired weapon now functioning at full capacity. The precision shot struck one of the pursuing vehicles, sending it into a spiraling crash. The communication building is beyond that courtyard, she said, pointing to a structure about 100 meters away. We need to reach it before they encircle our position. Theo studied the terrain between their cover and the building. Those ground vehicles can't follow if we go through there, he said, indicating a partially collapsed archway leading to a narrow passage. It's too tight for them. But easily flanked, Celera countered. We would be exposed. Theo's eyes lit up suddenly. What about the maintenance tunnels you mentioned? The ones that run beneath the entire city? Celara's expression changed subtly, the closest thing to surprise Theo had yet seen on her alien features. The access point is 30 meters to our right. Exposed ground. Create a diversion on the left, and I'll make a run for it, Theo suggested. I'm smaller and faster than you might think. For a moment, Celera seemed about to refuse, but another volley of energy fired decided the matter. Go on my signal, she said, adjusting her weapon settings. And Theo, she hesitated, be swift. Celera fired 3 rapid bursts at the scavenger's position, then launched her final shot at a towering crystal formation to their left. The structure collapsed with a thunderous crash, momentarily drawing all attention away from their position. Now, she hissed. Theo sprinted across the open ground, his small frame a blur against the ancient stonework. Energy blasts pursued him, striking the ground at his heels, but he reached the small access hatch unscathed. He wrenched it open and turned back to signal Celera. The Zendarian was already moving, covering the distance with long, graceful strides despite her age. A blast caught her shoulder as she neared the hatch, spinning her around, but she recovered and dove through the opening. Theo pulled the hatch shut behind them just as more blasts struck its exterior. You're hurt, he said, noticing the scorched scales on Celera's shoulder. Superficial, she replied, though her breathing had become labored. The tunnels will take us directly beneath the communication building. They moved quickly through the narrow passages, guided by Celera's knowledge and the soft bioluminescent fungi that lined the walls. Above them, they could hear the scavengers' vehicles circling the ruins. They'll find the access points eventually, Celera said. We have perhaps an hour before they locate us. When they finally emerged through another hatch into the communication building, Theo immediately set to work. His small hands moved deftly, connecting the quantum batteries to the ancient Zendarian device. Celera provided guidance, translating the complex technical specifications of her people's technology. It's working! Theo exclaimed as the massive communication array hummed to life. Ancient displays flickered with information in the Zendarian language. Now we just need to. The building shook as an explosion rocked its foundation. Dust and crystal fragments rained down from the ceiling. They found us, Celera said grimly. The signal needs time to penetrate the atmospheric interference. Another explosion, closer this time. Through the building's broken windows, they could see scavengers advancing through the ruins, weapons raised. How long? Theo asked. 20 minutes for a proper transmission. Celera checked her weapons charge. We have perhaps 5 before they breach our position. Theo's gaze swept around the ancient chamber, taking in equipment that had lain dormant for centuries. His eyes widened. Celera, what are these? He pointed to a row of crystalline orbs set into the wall. Defense nodes. Dead for centuries. Maybe not. Theo retrieved his multi-tool. If we reroute power from the auxiliary systems of the communicator. Understanding dawned in Celera's ancient eyes. It would delay the transmission. But keep us alive to complete it, Theo finished. For the first time since they'd met, Celera's lips curved into what might have been a smile. Proceed, Theo Parker. Your adaptability continues to impress. As the scavengers closed in on their position, human and Zendarian worked side by side, 2 species once bitter enemies now united by a common purpose. The defense nodes activated with a brilliant blue glow, creating a protective barrier around the building just as the first scavengers reached its entrance. In that moment, beneath the ancient crystal dome that had once housed the pride of Zendarian communication technology, a human boy and the last Zendarian stood together against the galaxy that had forgotten them both. The protective barrier shimmered under the relentless assault of the scavengers' weapons. Inside the ancient communication building, Theo monitored the transmission status while Celera maintained the defense systems they had jury-rigged together. 15% power remaining in the barrier, Celera announced, her voice steadied despite the dire situation. The transmission is at 87% completion. Theo wiped sweat from his brow. The quantum batteries from his evacuation pod glowed hot with strain, channeling energy into both the communication array and the defensive barrier. Outside, the scavengers had brought up heavier weaponry, each blast causing the crystalline structure to tremble. "We're going to make it," Theo said with quiet determination. "We just need a few more minutes." Celera glanced at the human boy, noting the resolve in his young face. In their weeks together, she had watched him grow from a frightened child into something more, a survivor who refused to yield to impossible odds. Transmission at 92%, the console chirped in ancient Zendarian. A particularly powerful blast rocked the building, sending cracked spiderwebbing across the barrier. Celera's hands moved swiftly across the controls, rerouting power from non-essential systems to maintain their protection. "Theo, when the transmission completes," she said calmly, "there is something you must know about Zendaria." He looked up at her, questioning. "This planet contains deposits of a material your people call stellarite. It exists nowhere else in the known galaxy." She met his gaze directly. "It was the source of our civilization's power, and the reason for our downfall. That's what the war was really about?" Theo asked, understanding dawning on his face. "Your ancestors discovered our dependence on it. Rather than allow us to control them through resource manipulation, they struck first." She paused. "History painted us as conquerors, but in truth, we were guardians of something too powerful to share freely." The console chimed again. "Transmission complete. Signal detected." Relief flooded Theo's features, but was quickly replaced by concern as the barrier flickered dangerously. "We still need to hold out until help arrives." Celera nodded grimly. "I have one final measure." She withdrew a small crystal from her garments, its interior swirling with vibrant energy. "A focusing crystal containing the last stable fragment of stellarite in my possession." "What will it do?" "Amplify the barrier temporarily, but it will reveal the nature of what lies beneath this planet to anyone monitoring energy signatures." Theo understood the weight of her decision. "You're protecting me at the cost of your people's greatest secret." "Perhaps it is time for secrets to end," Celera said softly. "The past cannot be changed, but the future." She looked at Theo meaningfully. She inserted the crystal into the control console. The barrier flared blindingly bright, knocking back the advancing scavengers. The building itself began to hum with power as ancient systems, dormant for centuries, reactivated under the influence of the pure stellarite fragment. Hours seemed to pass, though in reality it was less than 30 minutes, before the distinctive sound of a ship's engines broke through the cacophony of the scavengers' assault. The Galactic Patrol vessel descended through Zendaria's atmosphere, its weapons already targeting the scavenger ships. "They received our transmission," Theo whispered in disbelief. The scavengers, outmatched by the patrol cruiser, retreated to their remaining vehicles. The patrol ship landed in the courtyard outside the ancient building, and armored officers emerged, securing the perimeter. As the barrier finally collapsed, Theo and Celera emerged from the communication building. The patrol officers raised their weapons at the sight of Celera, clearly startled by the presence of a species long thought extinct. "Stand down," Theo called out, placing himself protectively in front of Celera. "She saved my life." The patrol captain approached cautiously. "Theo Parker? We intercepted your distress signal. Your identity matches a passenger reported lost in the Horizon Seeker disaster." His gaze shifted to Celera. "A living Xandarian. I didn't think any survived the war." "Just one," Celera replied with quiet dignity. "The last scholar of a fallen empire." The journey to the patrol ship was tense, with officers keeping a wary distance from Celera. As they prepared for departure, Theo noticed her lingering gaze across the ruins of her ancient home. "You don't have to leave," he said. "This is your home." Celera's silver eyes reflected the setting suns of Xandaria. "A home is not merely a place, Theo Parker. It is where one finds purpose." She gestured toward the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "For too long, I have dwelled among ghosts. Perhaps it is time to face the living." Aboard the patrol vessel, the captain informed them that they would be taken to Starbase Gamma, where Theo would be placed with surviving relatives. Celera's situation was to be determined by higher authorities. That night, as the ship broke orbit from Xandaria, Theo found Celera in the observation deck, gazing at the shrinking planet below. "I talked to the captain," he said, joining her at the viewport. "I told him everything you taught me about stellarite and what it could mean for sustainable energy throughout the galaxy." Celera turned to him, her expression questioning. "I also told him that my aunt is the director of interspecies relations at the Galactic Council," he continued with a small smile. "And that I won't cooperate with any debriefing unless you're treated as a diplomatic guest, not a prisoner." For the first time, Celera laughed, a sound like wind through crystal chimes. "You are indeed a remarkable specimen of humanity, Theo Parker." "I made them promise something else, too," he added. "They'll scan for Xandarian energy signatures in remote systems. If there are others hiding out there like you were, they may not wish to be found," Celera cautioned. "But they deserve to know they're not alone," Theo replied. "Just like I wasn't alone, thanks to you." As Xandaria receded from view, human and Xandarian stood side by side, an impossible friendship forged in the crucible of survival. Below them, the lost world kept its ancient secrets, waiting perhaps for a day when two civilizations might return not as enemies, but as partners in understanding the legacy left behind. "What will you do now?" Theo asked quietly. Celera placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "For the first time in centuries, young one, I do not know. And there is a certain freedom in that uncertainty." The starship accelerated to light speed, carrying with it not just the last Xandarian and a human boy who refused to surrender, but a new beginning, a bridge between past and future that neither species could have anticipated. In the vast blackness of space, possibility stretched before them like an unwritten page, waiting for their story to continue.